The South African government has condemned attacks on foreign nationals living in the country after a video circulated on social media showing an alleged physical attack on a Ghanaian man in KZN. The perpetrators were apparently demanding that the man prove his legal status. Ghanaian Foreign Affairs Minister Sam Okutetso Ablakwa said that he'd engaged with the acting South African High Commissioner in the West African nation, on the incidents and condemned the South African government for their reassuring response. ATM leader Vuyo Zumula weighed in on the matter, saying that these incidents and subsequent reaction by Ghana focused a spotlight on why people should be prioritized and taken care of by their countries, and says that this should also be a lesson for the South African government. He joins us now to tell us more. A very good morning to you, Vuyo. Thank you for your time and for joining us this morning. So you had responded to some of the scenes that we had seen on social media, and one thing that you said was there is no government that would summon our ambassadors if the government actually enforced immigration laws. So what do you think we are doing wrong as South Africa?
Morning, Katleho, and to all of your viewers. The incident really showed the crisis that South Africa is facing, because from a citizen point of view, once government is failing, South Africans take the law into their own hands. That is why in many areas we are going to have community policing forums. Those community policing forums, it is because the SAPS in those particular areas has failed to curb crime, to curb any form of lawlessness. In this particular case, you've got a failure of government to enforce immigration laws. And because it affects people as they live in the areas whereby they reside, they run businesses, they try and find work, they take it upon themselves to say, look, let us enforce the laws because we know what the law is saying. We know what the government is failing in terms of enforcing the laws. Therefore, the people stepped in. On the second aspect of things, once Ghana issued that statement, I read that statement. And for me, what I picked up, the interest of the Ghanaian government is the welfare and the well-being of Ghanaians in Ghana and everywhere else. Meaning Ghana is very clear about ensuring that their citizens are prioritized regardless whether they're in Ghana or elsewhere in the world. However, when you find that discussion happening in South Africa, the South African government is somewhat timid, it's somewhat afraid to prioritize the interests of South African citizens, which is what I was advocating for, that South African government must really learn from other countries that prioritize the interests of their own citizens.
And I mean, you go on to say that South Africans want the same from their government in their own country. The South African government is failing on this, hence people are standing to advocate for their own interests. Why do you think that South Africa takes the stance of timidness, as you put it, when it comes to the protection and the outward protection of its citizens?
What's very sad from my point of view, it's how South Africa, with the highest unemployment levels, not only in the continent but in the world, the youth unemployment levels are sitting above 70%. Every day we see videos of people, in their masses lining up for jobs. However, when you look at the job market in South Africa, the jobs are there, they are just occupied by foreign nationals. And this is done by the private sector that wants to pay low wages and exploit migrants because the migrants will accept almost anything. Now, the crisis that we have, it's one, a government that is seemingly afraid to touch the private sector because they are the ones who are supposed to holding the private sector accountable as government to say anyone that is working in South Africa must be legal in the country, and the private sector must prove that there is no South African that can do that particular work. However, they are failing to do that because even themselves as government, they are in the pockets of the private sector. That is why they can't go against the private sector. The second issue, it is that most of our politicians have got business interests across the continent, corruptly so. Meaning what then happens is that those business interests They make them to want to undermine the well-being of South African citizens simply because they want to safeguard their business interests across the continent. So the crisis that South Africans are facing, their own government is failing to prioritize them, to protect them, and their own government is creating a conducive environment for the exploitation of migrants. And it is something that is blatantly clear. Go to any farm, go to any restaurant, go to construction sites, you can see who's working there. And I want to also address this notion to say for migrants are doing work or jobs that South Africans do not want to do. That is a blatant lie that is peddled by people who want to really get South Africans out of the job market. Because if you look at the lines, the queues, it is mostly South Africans who are queuing up for cleaning jobs, for as many jobs as possible. However, the problem, it is this capitalist system that is enabled by government. And the last thing on this issue, Katlego, we only have 832 immigration officers in the country that can legally go to any company and ascertain whether the people that are employed in these farms, construction sites, and restaurants have got the valid documents. Only 832. The president realized this in the SONA, and he said he's going to employ 10,000 labor inspectors. However, the labor inspector does not have the mandate to check the legal status of foreigners in South Africa. That is why our view was to say the government was toying with the emotions of the people, because immigration problems can never be solved by labor inspectors.
So do you agree with the sentiment that's shared by many campaigners of migrant rights? I mean, the likes of Kopanang Africa, they argue that foreigners are scapegoated for South Africa's economic challenges. Do you agree with that perspective?
Not at all. I don't agree. It is not a scapegoat when you address someone who is illegal in the country. When you say to that person, illegal immigration is a crime, therefore, do not want to act as if you have not committed a crime by coming to a country illegally. Secondly, if you buy documents or you corruptly get documents in South Africa, it is also a criminal activity. And also, when it comes to people addressing, I know a lot of people say, once you talk about foreigners, even if you can remove them, unemployment will not be 0%. But the assertion that we're making, a 10% unemployment rate is way better than a 30% unemployment rate. And based on what we see in terms of happening in our respective communities and in these companies, their migrants are there, they are working, the foreigners are there, they are working, and South Africans are sidelined. And if the South African government were to enforce the law, then it means the unemployment rates would be drastically reduced in South Africa. So the likes of Kopanong, what they're trying to do, it is to want to blackmail South Africans. They want to make it as if the lived experiences of South Africans are not valid. Yet when you talk about someone, Katlego, when we grew up working in studying in varsity, we used to work in restaurants. It was our part-time jobs. That is how some of us got by. However, if you go to that sector now, there is no space for South Africans. However, if you're going to have the likes then of Kopanong, not really being sympathetic to the lived experience of South Africans and want to say South Africans are always in the wrongs, the migrants, foreigners who are sometimes illegal in the country, they are always at the right. That is a problem we need to address.
Speaking about being sympathetic to the lived experiences of South Africans, do you think that the lack thereof has really gotten us to this point where many South Africans have gotten so frustrated? I mean, with the scenes that we are seeing on social media, many of those, especially those of March and March, saying, in fact, that video that has made the rounds was of a South African who was taking advantage of that cleanup operation, and he was snatching phones, and that is why them saying not that they agree with the violence, but that man was particularly beaten up or assaulted because of the crimes that he was committed. But what seems now to be the narrative across social media and on many platforms is that that was a Ghanaian person who was beat up by South Africans. What does that do in terms of putting away the concerns and the frustrations of South Africans, of their lived experiences, to now what seems to be a narrative of xenophobia, not just in South Africa, but as a perception across the continent?
The biggest and most saddest thing that is there is that, firstly, South Africans are also victims of crime by the hands of foreign nationals. A few years ago, there were South African taxi drivers in Gqeberha whose taxis were burnt by Somalians. No one cried xenophobia. Similarly, there was one Zimbabwean who butchered and killed 7 family members at Xhosa in the Eastern Cape years ago. No one said it's xenophobia. However, once this narrative that is and propaganda that gets to be peddled to say South Africans are xenophobic, you are going to see one black person being maybe manhandled by protesters, and it's going to be flying on social media to say this person is not a South African citizen, therefore South Africans are xenophobic. And I want to educate people. The culture and the nature of South Africans is that they deal with crime decisively. Whether you are local or you are not local. I want to make an example. There was something that is there in many communities. In the Eastern Cape, we call it ichachalaza, meaning once you once you do crime, you get reported to the police and the police does not act. The community takes it upon themselves to really deal with you, manhandle you. Now, the issue, therefore, is that when South Africans who commit crime are handled by other South Africans, it is well and good, no one complains. However, when a foreign national commits a crime and is then handled by South Africans, then it is called xenophobia, which is an incorrect characterization. So what we should be having here is a government that really enforces the law. I want to remind you, Katlego, 2008, there was conflict between South Africans and foreign nationals. Over 60 people lives were lost back then. Now, what is it that South Africans were really wanting the government to address in 2008 already? It was the issue of illegal immigration, the issue of crimes committed by foreign nationals, and because they can't be traced, those crimes can't be solved. It was the issue of South Africans being sidelined for job opportunities and business opportunities in favor of foreign nationals. We're sitting here 18 years later in 2006, and that has not been addressed. Now, that is the question that people need to focus it on government to say, as a government, why are you failing to address this? Because we've not seen the Minister of Home Affairs to say, this is what we are going to do to address the crisis of illegal immigration. We've only seen the police minister to say South Africans must not be xenophobic, etc. However, when foreign nationals are committing crimes in South Africa, there is no word that is said by the Department of Police or by government to say foreign nationals come to the South Africa legally, if not, assist yourself to go home. So there's that soft approach towards the crimes of foreign nationals, and there's this aggressive approach on the side of South Africans wanting to defend themselves, wanting to defend their sovereignty and the future of their children.
And of course, that leads to a lot of frustrations by South Africans, which of course, we shouldn't at any point advocate for any vigilantism of South Africans taking the law into their own hands. Just very quickly, Vuyo, what then is the low-hanging fruit in terms of what government needs to do? You've mentioned that there are porous borders. We've got the private sector that is allowing for foreign nationals to be coming into this workspace. We've got corruption at Home Affairs. What should be the starting point that can start to see a turnaround for South Africans in a country that they so wish to live in?
The illegal immigration problem can only be solved once you have immigration officers employed in our country. you can't have an illegal immigration problem to the extent that we have and only have 832 people. And these 832 people, Katlego, they do not even have devices whereby if they are asking you whether you are legal in the country and you show them a passport, you show them an ID, they can't even check whether it is a valid document or not. They do not have a device for them to check. Now, it is something that the government is doing deliberately, so they are breaking the capacity of the state in order to enable illegal immigration. Therefore, the low-hanging fruit here, it is the employment of over 10,000 immigration officers, just like they wanted to employ over 10,000 labor inspectors. The second thing, it is to build border infrastructure whereby you don't just jump, you don't just walk between two countries because there are safety concerns, there are security concerns that need to be addressed. And thirdly, the government needs to own up and engage other countries when it comes to their citizens messing up in South Africa. For example, Ghana sees a video, they didn't even verify that that person is indeed Ghanaian, but they were so quick to issue a statement. However, you've got Nigerian nationals living in South Africa, feeding South Africans with drugs, well documented. You can even go to the Department of Justice, get reports as to how many which nationals are involved in drug trafficking in South Africa. It's Nigerian nationals. But not even once have we heard South African government summoning the ambassador of of Nigeria to say, account for the crimes committed by your nationals in South Africa. However, we only have a one-sided approach. That is why with this one-sided approach, this problem will not be fixed because South Africans are going to feel that they are not being heard, they are not being seen by their government. Therefore, they are going to take the laws into their own hands.
Surely a breakdown in communication between some of these African diplomatic countries. But thank you so much for your time and just giving us your insights. That's ATM Member of Parliament Vuyo Zungula speaking to us on the back of what is termed xenophobic attacks by South Africans to Ghanaians living in the country.